Hey, Zion Wayside, Pastor Kyle here with you again tonight for another Wednesday night devotion. I hope everybody's enjoying their summer so far. We've had an awesome stretch of weather. Hope you've been able to get outside, enjoy time with family, maybe hit the links. I know I've been out there a few times, but it's good to be here with you tonight as we continue our summer series as we are looking through the Psalms. And tonight we are looking through a very, very, very famous psalm, and it is not Psalm 23, which I'm sure we'll get to eventually. I mean, we got to go over Psalm 23. But instead, today, we are going to go through Psalm 22. What comes before Psalm 23? And as you look at the screen, you can probably already tell why this is such a famous passage. So we're not going to waste any time. We're just going to jump right in. And we see that this is a Psalm of David, but as we hear that first line, perhaps we don't always think of it as a Psalm of David, but rather words that who spoke? You know the answer. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's jump right in. Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? We hear those words and immediately think of Jesus there on the cross. And we're going to talk about that in a moment because I think we can make connections between what David is writing in this psalm and what is truly there happening on Calvary on the cross as Jesus is there. But yes, these are the words that Jesus speaks. And there is Jewish tradition out there that while our scriptures stop at Jesus saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? There are traditions out there that say Jesus said this entire psalm. And is that true? I guess I don't know the answer, but it's possible. And we're going to make connections between the theme that comes up as David is writing and then kind of what happens as Jesus is there on the cross. But we continue. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. So these first two verses really describe kind of the ultimate um, groaning, the ultimate despair, the ultimate feeling of loneliness. If God isn't hearing me, oh, that's as bad as it can possibly get. And so that is this feeling that David is bringing before God. As Jesus is on the cross, that is that feeling that he brings before God. Yet, knowing that, we continue with verse 3. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. That is going to be the theme of this entire psalm. This feeling of agony and despair and this feeling of being forsaken and lost and God not hearing. And then this declaration of who God is and what he's done, knowing that the people before me have trusted in you and they were delivered. They've certainly had their challenges. They were delivered. You heard them. You were with them. It's going to happen over and over and over again. So we keep going. Now there's another shift. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. So now he's describing the rest of the world and how they view David and Israel and how they are mocked and how they are treated shamefully. Yet he trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. So even at this, again, this feeling of being treated shamefully by the rest of the world, trust in the Lord. I've trusted you from day one, right? And then this petition, be not far from me, be at my side. You truly are the one who delivers. You are truly the one who helps. Now again, another shift. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. He's talking about enemies here. Enemies encircle Israel. Enemies encircle David. There is trouble nearby. Enemies are strong and mighty. He continues, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. We can make a connection there. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. We can make connections there. Interesting. Remember, obviously, what comes to mind when we think about this? Jesus at the cross, right? Starting to make connections. Maybe those legends are true. The tradition is true that Jesus spoke all these words. Even this, I can count all my bones. We remember the prophecy that said the Messiah, that his bones would not be broken. And this was the case for Jesus. None of his bones were broken. Garments divided, and they casted lots over them. Was that the case for Jesus? Yep. Yep. But remember, this is David here, speaking about the enemies that encircle him and the danger that is nearby. And again, we get that shift. But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him, and stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. So again, even in the midst of trials and challenges and enemies and pain and suffering and this feeling of being abandoned, there is continued praise and trust for deliverance and petition to him, calling out, be with us, deliver us from this. You've done it before. And there's this response that your name be praised, that your name be spread among the people. And not just for Israel, but all the ends of the earth. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Posterity shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord of the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, that he has done it. So kind of the theme throughout this Psalm 22 is this feeling of trouble, this feeling of being forsaken, this feeling of being away from the presence of God, being forsaken from the presence of God, and then continued trust in him, continued petition to him for this deliverance, and a continued remembering of how God has delivered and how he is with his people, how since day one from the womb we have trusted in God and he has delivered. So let's remember that as we go to Matthew 27 of the Good Friday scene, as we hear Jesus go to the scriptures and go to Psalm 22. But let's remember, as we read what happens in this narrative, this theme of forsaken, and God's presence with his people. Let's remember that. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? So we get Jesus' direct words in Aramaic, quoting what we just heard from Psalm 22, because he's speaking the truth. We know that Jesus goes to the cross to take the punishment that we deserve, and that is an absence from the presence of God. That is the punishment of death. It's exactly what if you were in worship, it's exactly what we heard in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, as Paul said something along the lines of, he who knew no sin into sin, and that is the absence of God. And so while Jesus lived that perfect life, that perfectly interdependent life according to the will of God, according to the law of God, never sinned, did it perfectly, he became sin. He became this absence of God. And that is why he says, why have you forsaken me? But let's continue reading, because we're going to hear more about why Jesus is enduring what he is enduring. Again, as we heard from David, as he writes this psalm, that beginning is the point of despair, being forsaken by God. That is the point of despair. And Jesus is feeling that now. But let's continue reading, because we're going to hit the second part of that theme. But this is an interesting note. So Jesus says this first line of Psalm 22, and some of the bystanders hearing it said, this man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the other said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. I think they're calling out to Elijah, the prophet. Is that what Jesus is doing? No. He's calling out to his Father. But this is the part, verse 51, that I kind of want to focus on for a minute. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. So, as a part of temple life during that time period in Israel, there was the place of the most holies where only the priest could go in, and this was that curtain that separated that, because behind that curtain, God was present in a very special and unique way. Not anybody could just go in there, is the point. Only the appointed priest could go in there and be in the presence of the most holy place. But let's make the connection. Jesus says, why have you forsaken me? Jesus experiences what it's like to be absent from the presence of God. Jesus does. And what happens as he cries out with a loud voice and gives up his spirit? The curtain is torn in two. What does that mean? Let's make that connection. As Jesus experiences the separation from God, the curtain is torn, and now God's presence is with us, is with all his people. Jesus suffers the punishment that we deserve, and now, as a result of that forgiveness, as a result of that sacrifice, God's presence now goes out to be with all his people, bringing about life. And this is a part of the scriptures that perhaps we don't talk about enough. It's a part of the Good Friday narrative that perhaps we don't talk about enough. What happens after God's presence, after the curtain is torn, after Jesus yields up his spirit, and God's presence goes to be with the world? The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So certainly we celebrate Jesus' resurrection, right? But the tombs were opened, and Matthew gives us this narrative that this was happening. So we see firsthand God's presence go with his people, the gift of life go with his people right away. So as we think about Psalm 22, certainly the first thing that comes to mind is Jesus and what he has done and accomplished for us at the cross. He served as that sacrifice. He experienced what it means to be forsaken by God so that the curtain was torn and God's presence now goes with us all. And we see that even more so at the day of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit is poured out to the disciples and then goes forward preaching to all the nations, and everybody can hear it and understand it. And so we even see today God's presence with us through that as we continue to preach his word and administer his sacrament. We see Jesus present with us there with his body and blood. We see God the Father's guidance with us in creation, and day by day as we live out our lives as he continues to renew faith and life within us. And so there is no doubt that the curtain has been torn and that we are not forsaken and that God goes with us. All right. So God's blessings to you this day. We will see you on Sunday.